Hello again, VR fans. Today I'm going to be taking a little bit of a dive into the weapon stats of ALVO. The reason for this is because there seems to be some confusion within the general PSVR community around the in-game statistics. This has even led to some false reports that all the weapons in ALVO are near identical, and although the in-game stats are currently incorrect, displaying identical graphs, the insinuation that all the guns are identical couldn't be further from the truth. Please be aware that none of my findings are an exact science, and some of my gathered data is not only subjective but also influenced by outside factors, such as not being able to test in empty servers. There are currently no custom games to test in solo, so apologies to anybody's games are negatively affected gathering these numbers. And we also have to consider hardware issues, such as the PSVR and PlayStation Aim's tracking. Regardless, I'm hoping I did a pretty good job, and I'm hoping that maybe we can get a little insight from the developers, or maybe spur them on to update the in-game statistics ASAP. First we'll start with the game sidearms. Although I would never suggest that you use these as your default weapon, they both have surprisingly good stats, especially when used in close quarters combat scenarios, and they actually compete pretty well against the main weapons. Firstly, we'll look at the game's default secondary firearm, the Falcon. Based on the M1911 sidearm, this gun has a 12 round magazine, fires single fire, and shoots a low to medium damage round. Although it is single fire, you can happily spam the trigger to pump out as much lead as humanly possible. This weapon practically has no muzzle climb, despite being able to tap fire quickly. It has a 2.1 second reload time, which is the quickest weapon reload in the game. Here's the recoil pattern, and here's the tree chart. And as you can see, the weapon is pinpoint accurate, but with no option for scope detachments, its effective range is stuck at close range engagements only. Moving on to the second sidearm, the Comet. Based on the Glock 17C, this gun has a 17 round clip and fires fully automatic, with a low damage round. This gun has a high muzzle climb when fully emptying the clip, veering slightly towards the right. The gun model also shifts to the right when ADS, making it slightly difficult to control. Finally, the gun has a 2.5 second reload time, which is slightly longer than the Falcon, but not enough to negatively affect you. Here's the recoil pattern, and the tree chart. Again, this gun does not offer scope detachments, so iron sights only. So that's the pistols. In my opinion, these guns are more than useful in a pinch, although it's not likely to come up often as there's generally enough ammo in the map to keep you in primary ammo 95% of the time. It's worth keeping in mind though that the developers are planning on allowing players to dual wield these weapons in a future patch via the move controllers, at which point these guns could become a powerful meta in the tighter maps such as House and Monastery, so be warned. Finally, at one point during testing, I run into a bug that allowed me to run the Hornet as my secondary weapon. This could be a sign that they may end up allowing this weapon to be dual wielded also, or maybe it was just a bug. Either way, I wasn't able to recreate this, which is probably for the best. Moving on, we're now going to take a look at the game's two SMGs, starting with the Hornet. Based on the P90 PDW, this gun is the largest capacity clip in the game at 50 rounds. Each bullet has the lowest damage projectile, as far as I can tell in the game, but the gun also has the highest rate of fire in order to compensate. This gun has a high muzzle climb veering to the left, but is surprisingly accurate despite this, with a tight spread of bullets. The gun reloads quickly in 2.2 seconds. Here's the recoil pattern, and here's the tree chart. This gun is deadly in the wrong hands and was the weapon of choice early after release, but usage seems to have dropped off since. My biggest complaint with this gun is that it doesn't have any kind of iron sights, and it sits low in the player's view while ADS, making it difficult to use until you unlock a red dot or a holographic sight. Next we have the Hurricane. Based on a UMP-45, this gun has a 40 round magazine firing a low to medium damage round with a medium rate of fire. This gun has a very consistent vertical muzzle climb, but is unique in having a lot of horizontal recoil, jumping from one side to the other, making it one of the more difficult guns to control at a distance. The gun also veers slightly towards the right, much like the Comet. The gun reloads in 2.2 seconds, which is identical to the Hornet. Here's the recoil pattern, and here's the tree chart. The Hurricane is a good all-rounder weapon, working well in close to medium range engagements, like any SMG should. Just don't bother putting a magnified scope on it, as it's basically useless at long ranges due to the horizontal kick. Both of ALVO's SMGs work really well at close quarters, and are surprisingly useful with a bit of range too, unlike our next weapon on the list, the Saber. Based on the M870 combat shotgun, this weapon has a shell capacity of 8 rounds, which fire in a wide cone, releasing 8 individual pellets with a random spread. The gun has a slow rate of fire, and as a result has 0 muzzle climb between shots. The Saber reloads all 8 shells in 5.5 seconds, and individual shells in 1.1 seconds, including chambering the round. You can also interrupt the reload by firing the gun, and by switching weapon. Here's the pellet spread when firing 3 rounds. And here's the effective area. The Saber is currently the most inconsistent weapon in the game, which is often an issue with video game shotguns. It's a good gun, but situational, as it should be, and is only useful at very short ranges. My advice would be to pair this with a Comet for a fun run and gun combo. Let's move on to the game's selection of assault rifles, starting with the Annihilator. Based on the evergreen AK-47 platform, this is probably the most middling and generally consistent weapon in the game, which is probably why the developers made it the player's default firearm. It has a 35 round magazine, firing a medium to higher damage round, with the slowest rate of fire in its weapon class. It has a consistent vertical muzzle climb, but it will tend to wander off to the right the longer you hold onto the trigger, but this is easily controlled. The gun reloads in 3.0 seconds exactly. Here's the recoil pattern. And here's the tree chart. This is a great starter weapon and is consistent enough to use it long after unlocking the game's other weapons. Moving on, we come to the Viper, which appears to be based on a modified M16A4 frame. This gun has a 36 round magazine and is probably the most unique gun in the game, firing with a quick 3 round burst that pack a real punch, pumping out medium to high damage rounds. The first 2 bullets land in almost the same spot, while the third bullet jolts the gun vertically. At range, this gun can be very effective, and if you stop firing between bursts, the gun will always return to its original position. But if you tap fire rapidly, the gun has huge, almost uncontrollable vertical recoil, reducing the gun's effectiveness at range. This gun also reloads at 3.0 seconds. Here's a recoil pattern while tap firing, and the tree chart. In my opinion, this is probably my favourite, although not the best, gun in the game. A lot of time has clearly gone into this weapon by the developers, and it shows. Finally, in the assault rifle category, we come to the Proton. This gun is essentially an M4 carbine, has a 30 round magazine and shoots in full auto at a higher rate of fire than any other assault rifle. This weapon fires low to medium damage rounds, but this is offset by having the tightest recoil pattern of all the standard weapons, with low vertical muzzle climb that hardly ever wanders and a high rate of fire. Combine this with the stability bonus of crouching to turn this weapon into a laser beam even at range. As with the other assault rifles, the Proton reloads in 3.0 seconds. Here's the recoil pattern and the tree chart. This is undoubtedly the #1 weapon in the game, but at the same time, kind of the most boring as a result. It's kind of like the class overachiever. You know he's great at everything he does, but it doesn't mean you want to be his friend. So that's our selection of assault rifles. It's a varied selection, but the Proton could do with being a bit more unique, and generally speaking, less good at what it does. The fact it does everything so well pretty much makes every other gun in the game kind of pointless at the moment. Maybe this is something the devs will look into in the future, but I'm worried that players may have already got too attached to it in its current form. But we'll see. And finally, we come to ALVO's most notorious weapon, the Choco, which is based on the VSR Bar 10 platform. This gun spent its first week the only gun worth using in ALVO, killing people with only 1 bullet regardless of where you hit them in the body. Couple this with the accuracy afforded by the aim controller, and we were left with a recipe for disaster, and naturally, the developers nerfed this weapon in a hotfix soon after release. Since then, you won't see many Choco players running around, but it's still a formidable weapon in my opinion. This is a single firing, bolt action rifle with a 5 round magazine and has 0 muzzle climb with pinpoint accuracy, but a very low rate of fire. The Choco reloads in 2.5 seconds. It's pretty pointless, but for completionist's sake, here's a recoil pattern and the tree chart. Believe it or not, the Choco is still a hard hitting rifle that will guarantee a kill with a single headshot or only 2 body shots. This gun only requires a degree of skill to wield, but it seems for a lot of people, they're just not interested in putting the time into it. And that's ALVO's current arsenal. But before we finish the video, here are a few more notes I picked up during my testing. Currently, all of the automatic weapons have reduced recoil when the player is crouched. The recoil is practically halved, but considering the run and gun nature of the game as a whole, this might not come up very often. Weirdly though, going fully prone offers zero benefit to recoil reduction. This is probably a bug, but equally it could be a genuine decision by the developers to discourage camping on larger maps with longer sightlines, but I'm not sure. Also, there doesn't seem to be any bullet damage fall off at greater distances, meaning a bullet will do identical damage at greater distances than it would at point blank range. This isn't a major issue in a run and gun shooter, and most of the gun's recoil patterns make longer range engagements difficult to take advantage of this anyway, except for, well, the Proton when you're crouched. Also, there doesn't seem to be any bullet physics or other advanced ballistics, like bullet drop or object penetration, but it's fine, especially some of these features have only recently been introduced into AAA franchises such as Call of Duty. Finally, I'd like to point out the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to ALVO, and it's the grenades. In my opinion, they are way too powerful at the moment. On spawn, most players will just spam both of the grenades in the general area of the enemy team for a solid chance for a couple of easy kills, and in my opinion, it's detracting from the rest of the game and its overall weapon selection. I personally would prefer players to be restricted to one throwable, including stuns and smokes, and I'd reduce the grenade damage to cause a maximum of 90% player damage. This would make grenades tactical choices rather than what they are at the moment, which are basically cheese potatoes. And that's your lot. I hope this video will be useful to somebody, and if the ALVO devs add any more weapons to the game in the meantime, I'll probably update this list in the future. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in more PlayStation VR fun, then smash the like and subscribe buttons, drop a comment, and maybe even consider sharing this, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!